Hello, students. Well, we're downstairs. We're not up in the attic right now because it's a little bit hot. So I'm downstairs in the heat with the hot coffee. Let's talk about crime. Let's talk about crime. This is the first of 3 videos about the sociology of crime. Why? Well, it's a hot topic. We sort of want to understand why people follow the rules and why they break the rules. And we've been talking about this idea of norms and that there are different levels of norms. Remember, folkways, mores, and then laws. And then some behavior is just deviant because you didn't shake a hand, or you didn't open a door, or you didn't tip someone when you were having dinner at a restaurant. Like, those are informal norms. But then when we talk about the violation of the formal norms, we get into the definition of crime. What is criminal? And crime definitely is defined by any violation of any law. So speeding is a crime. Jaywalking is a crime. Not paying your taxes is a crime. Murdering somebody is a crime. They're all crimes. And if you ever committed any of them, you're a criminal. And one of the reasons I mention this is because we can make a pretty solid argument that you are a criminal while you're committing the crime, while you're stabbing them or choking them. But are you a criminal after you committed the crime? And for how long? I say this because there is a bunch of people that want to refer to people that walked across the border without papers as criminals, illegal aliens, or they're all criminals. In fact, we are all criminals. We've all violated laws in our life. Sometimes laws that we didn't even know existed. We violated laws. So to refer to a particular group of people as criminals is a little bit misleading because we are all criminals to varying degrees. And in fact, one of the things we know is communities with higher rates of undocumented immigrants in them have lower crime rates. That when people are here without their papers, which is including people in my family, the last thing they want to do is attract the attention of the police. They don't jaywalk. They don't drive drunk. They don't beat their partners because if the police show up and they don't have their papers, they're on a slow boat to Tijuana. So, like this cat. So actually, if you want to lower the crime rate in your town, the best thing to do is increase the number of undocumented immigrants. That's a statistical truth, Ruth. So what we want to talk about in this first lecture is how we think of that line between what's criminal and what's non-criminal. Because crime is, are you ready for this? A social construction of reality. We socially construct where that line is between things that violate informal norms, folkways and mores, and things that violate formal norms, laws. And sometimes things that are the norm become against the law. So, for example, racial segregation, especially in the South where I come from, was the law of the land. It was illegal for you, if you were black, to drink out of that drinking fountain or to sit on the front of the bus or go into that Woolworths. That now is against the law. What was the law is now against the law. Or a more local example, it has to do with pot. Pot was part of the war on drugs and a massive source of incarceration. There's over 32,000 people that are in prison right now for marijuana possession. And I can just go down the street. I've got 3 pot shops within 10 blocks of this house that I can go and buy some weed, some bud, some tinctures, some juice. I'm not saying I do, but I certainly could, because at least in Oregon, it's now legal. So what was something that would get you thrown in prison? I mean, one of the reasons my brother is here for his cancer treatment is an ounce of marijuana gets you 1 year in prison. And as someone who would like to have marijuana for his cancer treatment, for his appetite and for his pain, he's here where he just walks across the street and buys pot from where he's living. So crime is a social construction of reality. We construct where that line is. So we want to get into a little bit of a conversation today. We're going to do this fairly briefly about how we draw that line, where we draw that line. If you think of it, wait, hold on. This is my high-tech diagram where we have folkways, mores, and laws, right? right? There's a line. Where do you draw the line when somebody says that ought to be a law? There's kind of three questions we generally ask about how something is determined to be deviant enough that there ought to be a law to control it, to sanction it. So these are the three questions. Sounds like a good exam question for the final. Just getting you ready. The first question is, what are the consequences of the act? If we think of crime as an act or deviance as an act, not opening the door or swearing in front of a kid, whatever it is, if we think of it as an act, what are the consequences of the act? The first question is, what are the consequences of the act? Who is hurt by the act? And we're going to get into typology a little bit later and talk about the concept of victimless crimes, but who's affected by the act? And we can think about some crimes happen or some behaviors that might not be polite happen and nobody's really affected by it. You shouldn't pick your nose. But what's the big deal if somebody picks their nose? It's not a really big deal. You should tip somebody. But is not tipping someone serious enough? Does it do enough harm to the collective whole that we should legalize tipping like they do in Canada, where everything has a value-added tax to it? We don't think so. We're not in America. And I'll give you a really good example of this, about how the act can have sort of three different interpretations based on the consequence of the act, not the act. Okay, so let's talk about drunk driving. Drunk driving is bad business. Let me tell you, don't do it. I was put through a windshield by a drunk driver. Someone was killed in that accident. I'm very much against drunk driving. Please don't do it. Having said that, it's very easy to have enough alcohol in your system to legally be under the influence of alcohol. 0.08 blood count, alcohol blood count is legally drunk in the state of Oregon. That's a couple glasses of wine. That's a few beers. You go to a show or you go out to dinner and you have a couple glasses of wine and you drive home, you're legally intoxicated. Now, let's take this through three scenarios. Scenario number one is you have a couple glasses of wine with dinner or a few beers with the bros, and you drive home and, nothing happens, right? Probably shouldn't have done it, but you did and nobody was hurt. That's scenario number one. You drive drunk, nothing happens, no harm, no foul, we're good. Second scenario is there happens to be a cop behind you while you're driving home and you swerve a little bit and that cop puts on the blues, pulls you over, and writes you a ticket for driving while intoxicated, and that is a lot of heartache. You're going to be paying thousands of dollars to get yourself out of that. It's going to be on your record forever, and there's a stigma associated with it. So that's a much bigger deal. Same behavior, driving while intoxicated. In the second one, you attracted the attention of the cops and you got a ticket and you're down that rabbit hole of having a DUI. Third scenario is same amount of alcohol in your system, right? You're thinking, should I drive home? Yeah, close enough. You get behind the wheel, you drive home, and there's a kid on a bike that pulls out in front of you and you're not sharp enough to stop and you hit him and kill him. Right, now we've got vehicular homicide. We've got manslaughter. You're going to prison. And the point is, in those three scenarios, the actual act, drinking while driving, is the exact same. What's different are the consequences. So in the first question, when we're figuring out where we draw the line, we think about what are the consequences of an act? Who is hurt or who potentially can be hurt by an act? Nose picking, not really much damage there. Not paying a tip, a little bit more damage, but we're not going to make it against the law in this country where it is in other countries. Drinking and driving, all right, somebody could get killed. There ought to be a law, and there is a law. So that's number one. Number two is where we really get into our sociology of bias, and it's who is involved in the norm breaking. Who is involved in the breaking of the rules? And this is where all our stereotypes come into play. Our stereotypes about race and class, our stereotypes about gender, our stereotypes about young people versus old people, and the same behavior when it's committed by other people can create dramatically different reactions. Make sure I tell the story in the class of me in New York City in Central Park for the 20th anniversary of John Lennon's murder. as a really good example of how who's committing the act changes the reaction. There's a book I used to assign in my criminology class called "The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison," all about sort of the class biases in the system, and who gets a pass and who gets sent to the big house. There is a great documentary called "The House I Live In," all about the war on drugs and how the war on drugs really went after and continues to go after poor and minority people. I know this coming from Atlanta. In the city of Atlanta in the 1980s, when I was in college, there was a drug squad at Atlanta Police Department called the Red Dog Squad. And the Red Dog Squad would go into the housing projects where low-income people lived who were disproportionately African American. And if you had a little bit of weed on you, they were throwing you to the ground, arresting you. You're handcuffed in the back of a car, and now you're in the criminal justice system, and that criminal record follows you for the rest of your life, including if you're accused of another crime. Well, you've got this drug arrest, so you must be a bad person. You must be guilty. You're in this sort of rabbit hole of criminality because the Red Dog Squad wanted to go after, in their war on drugs, on poor black people who had a little bit of cocaine on them. Not far away from the housing projects of Atlanta was my campus, Emory University, a very bougie university. They call it the Harvard of the South. There was can I say this, a shit ton of drugs on our campus, and we never had the Red Dog Squad show up. We never saw the police ever. In fact, Fraternity Row, where all the frat houses were, was a hot spot. I know there was one particular fraternity because I knew somebody who was connected to this. They were the suppliers of cocaine on Emory University in the 80s. There was a guy who drove to Miami once a month in his Scirocco car, picked up a big suitcase of cocaine. The word would get out Friday night, Saturday night, there's going to be a big party at this frat house, and the next day there would be cocaine all over the campus. The drug squad never showed up once to arrest any of those Emory students who were trafficking in cocaine, much more deadly than marijuana. Meanwhile, in the housing projects, people were getting busted for a little bit of weed and in the system forever. So we use sort of our biases, and this is something we're going to get into the second video about why we have such a stereotype about who the criminals are, the usual suspects, as we like to say, and that affects how we respond. Okay, so first question is, what are the consequences of the act? Second is, who's involved in the act itself? The third question we're asking is, what are the local standards regarding that act? What are the community feelings regarding that act? I mean, I think some of you know when you live in different places, sometimes you got to know that the laws shift a little bit. Portland, jaywalking is against the law, but I have never heard of anybody getting a ticket for jaywalking in Portland. LA is completely different. I have gotten a ticket on Hollywood Boulevard by a cop. It was in the 80s, so this joke isn't going to make any sense, but I was like, are you joking? And he's like, do I look like a comedian? And I said, I don't know, are you a Beverly Hills Cop? Which would be hilarious if this was 1984 and you were an Eddie Murphy fan, because he had a movie called Beverly Hills Cop. But the point is, jaywalking standards are different in LA and Portland. An example I love to talk about is with regard, often there's a lot of variation. The perfect example is with regard to hate crimes. I mean, hate crimes vary so much from some states, like Wyoming, don't even have hate crime laws. We have a pretty expansive law that protects not only people who are attacked because of race and religion, but also sexual orientation and gender identity. The hate crime laws in the South don't include sexual orientation or gender identity in their hate crime statutes, because being gay is just being wicked. Right? The local standards are different. So if somebody's going out and beating up somebody because they're gay, they might get arrested for an assault, but they're not going to be charged with a hate crime in Mississippi because Mississippi is different than Oregon. An example I always use, speaking of the South, I don't know if everybody remembers Blockbuster Video. Ask your grandparents about Blockbuster Video. Back in the day, we used to go to the video store and rent a videotape of a movie or a DVD, watch it, and then take it back. Be kind, rewind. And there's a movie that won an Academy Award for Best Foreign Film in the 80s called The Tin Drum. I just finally saw it. It's a really powerful film, and it includes some child nudity in it. It won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. It's widely regarded as one of the great films of the 80s, and it's It was in blockbusters all over the country. There was a case in Alabama where an undercover vice cop walked into a blockbuster and rented the Tin Drum, and then came back and arrested the manager of the blockbuster for trafficking and child pornography, because this movie had naked kids in it who were getting a little frisky in that community. Not in L.A., not in Oregon, not in Atlanta, not in, not where people are sort of film buffs, but in the Bible Belt. That local community saw that as child pornography and criminalized its sale. So the blockbuster. Fortunately, he won on appeal. He was like, it won an Oscar, and then they let him out of jail. But so the point is, the third question we ask about where we draw this line is, what are the local standards? What's happening in the local community? And again, think about hate crime laws and how much they vary from state to state, depending on where you are. So those are the three questions. And when we do that, we can kind of come up with sort of an argument about why the line is where it is. Why the line is on informal deviance instead of informal deviance. Because who's affected by the act? Who's seen committing the act? And what are the social biases about those people? If it's rich white guys, But if it's poor black guys, oh yeah, it's definitely a crime. And what are the local standards around that act? Local standards, of course, change, as we've talked about, with regards to civil rights laws and sodomy laws. Remember that discussion? Okay, so that's the first part of this this first crime lecture. The second part is we love typologies in science. We love to type things. We like to type trees and animals. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? I still don't know. Apparently peanuts are not nuts. I mean, we love typology, so we're always kind of putting things in categories because it allows us to sort of think about them and theorize about them. And it's the same thing with crime. We love to talk about crime, and crime is typologized all over the place. I mean, the ancient Romans typologized crimes as crimes against men, murder, and crimes against the gods, the kind of blasphemy type gods. The British organized crimes alphabetically because they're English. That's what they would do. So you would have arson and assault would be in a category, and burglary and buggery would be in a category. Don't Google buggery. I'll get in trouble. The French organized crimes in level of their seriousness, which is where we get the kind of concept that we use of violation, misdemeanor, and felony. The main typology we're going to talk about comes from the FBI. And we're going to get into the FBI way of measuring crime a little bit later in another video. But we're going to use the 4 typology system that the FBI uses to talk about crime. And you'll see very quickly that it's immediately problematic. Okay, category number 1. Category number 1 are violent crimes. These are crimes in which somebody's body is hurt. You're stabbing someone, and they start to bleed a little bit, right? So we have assault, we have murder, we have manslaughter, we have rape, we have anything where a physical body is hurt. And so, when we talk about crime, these are often the things that come out of our minds, like, I don't want to get murdered, like the murder rate is going up, the murder rate equals the crime rate. We sort of focus on violent crime. And when we go see a crime movie, we assume that there's going to be guns in it and people are going to get shot, right? If it's a crime film. Like, go see a crime movie. I'm not going to see a lot of people writing letters saying, he stole my heart. That's a Taylor Swift record. That's not a crime movie. So the first category is violent crime. The second category we have are what we call property crimes. Property crimes. These are crimes against property, not crimes against people, but crimes against their stuff, the things that they have. So theft, the most common crime in America is petty larceny, stealing stuff. You're stealing someone's laptop. You're stealing someone's water bottle. There's water in this bottle, by the way. You're stealing someone's car. You're stealing someone's, something. Or you're robbing a bank. Or you're vandalizing a wall, or you're burning down a house. Like, it's the property that is affected by it. It's not the person getting stabbed, it's the thing being stolen. property crimes. And again, these are the most common crimes in America. According to the FBI, property crimes are the most common. If you ever had your bike stolen, or had your wallet stolen, or had your innocence stolen, already when we're in this category, things get a little messy. Because let's take one particular crime, armed robbery. Armed robbery. Should armed robbery be a violent crime or a property crime? The goal of an armed robbery is somebody walks up to you and says, your money or your life. This is me pretending I have a gun in my shirt. Your money or your life. They want your money. They want your property. Traditionally, armed robbery, or robbery in general, has been defined as a property crime because the goal is to steal the property. But recently, the FBI has moved robbery into the violent crime category. You want to know why? Because there's the threat of violence. The threat of violence is enough, even though you're not just stabbing them. I mean, before the idea was your money or your life, you're stealing their property, and if in the process of robbing them, you shoot them, then it becomes a violent crime. Right? We've got a property crime that becomes a violent crime. The FBI's argument now is just the threat that you might get shot makes it a violent crime, and that sort of makes sense. I mean, nobody likes to be threatened that they're going to die. I have way too many stories. These videos would all be way too long, but I was mugged in Washington, D.C. It was quite interesting, and the guy pretended he had a gun, and I kept asking him to show me the gun. Can I see your gun? Show me the gun. I was interviewing him while he was, this is what happens when you mug a criminologist. I was interviewing him, like, can I see your gun? And he was smart enough to know that if he showed it to me, then it goes up a level in terms of how severe it is. If it's just pretending to have one, it's not quite as severe. I don't think he had a gun. He seems like a nice guy. Okay, so violent crimes, property crimes. The third type of crime is a little bit interesting, and you're going to notice when it pops up on the screen why. Victimless crimes. Victimless crimes. All right, did you know what was different with that when you saw it on the screen? You should have seen the little quotation marks around victimless. Victimless crimes are the idea that the criminal act, you're only hurting yourself. You're the person that you're hurting. So here we have sort of three victimless crimes. One is illegal drug use. I'm hurting myself by taking fentanyl. Fentanyl? Fentanyl. I'm hurting myself by underage drinking. I'm hurting myself by shooting up heroin. Drugs are one. Gambling is another one. I'm hurting another by putting all my money on the roulette wheel. I'm only hurting myself by betting on the horse or betting on the Super Bowl. I'm just hurting myself by engaging in gambling. The third one is prostitution, right? Again, I'm only hurting myself by prostituting, selling my body for sex. I'm the only one. This is my body, my choice. My body, my choice, right? That's not meant for that intent. But the idea is you're only hurting yourself. Now, the reason that we have the quotation marks around victimless is, yeah, there are definitely victims associated with these actions, right? In the drug trade, I mean, think about drive-by shootings. Think about all the violence that's happening in Mexico. Think about people getting high and going crazy and, beating people up. I mean, this is certainly a concern in downtown Portland with the fentanyl crisis, that some of those people are engaged in violent behavior. So there's victims associated with drugs, victims associated with gambling. If you've ever gambled and been down, that idea that I can win it all back. If I just had $200, man, I'll just put it on black on the roulette wheel and double it, and I'll be back in black, as AC/DC said. Where we see gambling addiction, and surprise, surprise, we see a lot of corollary crime, meaning gambling addicts often steal things so they can go gamble it more in the belief that they'll win the money back, which is a fool's errand. Please don't go down that road. There's all kinds of help in Oregon for gambling addicts, because you can just lose it all, and you're just like, maybe I'm going to turn to crime, maybe I'm going to turn to prostitution. If I get some money, I can win it all back. And of course, prostitution has victims as well. There's a problem of sexually transmitted diseases, especially when you enter HIV into the issue. People can literally die They're not only the prostitutes, but their customers and the family members. You know, some guy goes to visit a prostitute and he takes it home and he gives that disease to his wife, and she's the one that dies of HIV, right? We've got victims all over the place. But also, the prostitution trade is a form of sex trafficking. I mean, we have legal slavery. Just take a drive down Northeast Sandy and 82nd, that corner right there around there, and see that there's a healthy sex trade in Portland on a Saturday afternoon. You know, we have prostitutes out on the street, and they aren't independent contractors. They've got a pimp who is controlling them, and it's a form of sexual slavery, that includes children in it. So there are serious victims associated with prostitution. So when we say victimless crime, we like to put these quotations around it. But the argument is, and the argument is being made right now, is that since those categories primarily affect the people who are committing them, maybe they shouldn't be criminal behavior. Maybe you should be able to do drugs if you want to do. You can do this. This is water again, by the way, but this was whiskey at one point. It's hot, so I was just looking for a good bottle. A good bottle. Whiskey is brown. This is nice tap water. You know, we legalized booze. Why not legalize drugs? And of course, we have done that in Oregon with regards to marijuana. Gambling is legal here in certain settings. Like if you're at a casino, if you're at a bar for video poker, just the lottery. I mean, the lottery is an incredible form of gambling. You know, we've legalized it here in a controlled setting. And even in prostitution, Nevada has legalized prostitution. And the idea is, you know, those prostitutes come in for their weekly health screening to make sure they're not spreading diseases, and they're not working for sex traffickers. They're working in businesses that are legitimate. So there is a conversation being had about should these behaviors be criminalized at all. And there are people, even conservatives believe, some conservatives believe that hard drugs should be legalized. Let's legalize heroin and cocaine and treat it like a medical issue. You've got an addiction. You get your prescription filled for your heroin. And instead of nodding in the middle of the street, you've got enough to make sure that you're okay and you can go to work. So that's a conversation that's being had around victimless crimes. Okay, the fourth category is one that we really should spend a lot more time on, and that's white-collar crime. White-collar crime. So the first one, violent crime, affects the body, attacking someone's body. Property crime affects someone's stuff, right? You're taking someone's stuff, or you're burning their house down. The third one is victimless crimes. You're hurting yourself by engaging in the crime. Fourth one, white-collar crimes, you're victimizing institutions. It's institutions. It's not people. I mean, people are affected by it, of course. But the idea of it is you're ripping off an institution. So the classic example of a white-collar crime is embezzlement. Embezzlement is where you steal from the place that you work. And this could be seen as creative accounting, cooking the books. Imagine, if you will, you're working at a corporation and you're the accountant and you're the one that's in charge of where all the money goes. You could do a little bit of beep, 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 maybe on your computer in your office, and 0.5% of every transaction goes into a bank account you have in Switzerland, and nobody's going to know it, right? And all of a sudden you've got $1 million. I mean, there's ways of embezzling, but embezzling can be the creative accounting, but embezzling is also just stealing from your workplace. If you work at a dress shop and you take a dress home, that's embezzlement. I worked in a record store for 7 years. Some of those records came home with me and never made it back. I'm going to take this Michael Jackson album home and give it a listen and see if, so I can sell it to other people. If I'm working at PCC and I need some computer paper, I need some printing paper for my printer over there, and I take a ream of printer paper from the social office, that's embezzlement. I don't do that because printing paper is fairly cheap at Fred Meyer. But that's also a form of white-collar crime. But there's a ton of other ones, including tax evasion, not paying your taxes, price fixing. Companies get together and figure out how much a gallon of gas or how much a gallon of milk is going to cost the consumers. Health and safety regulations. This is a big one. People die because of white-collar crime. I mean, there are regulations, and the classic example are in the mines. If I'm working in the mines are very dangerous places. Mines, collapse. Mines blow up. People get black lung from working in mines. So there are a bunch of laws to protect miners. But doing those things to protect the miners costs money. And if I own the mine, I can, make things extra safe and spend all the money. But if I want to cut some corners because that's more money in my pocket, and the mine collapses, I've committed a regulatory violation. I have not done the work that I was supposed to do by law to make the mine safe, and now there are dead people. And there are hundreds of thousands of people every year who die because of violation of health and safety regulations on the workforce, on the workplace. People who work at a Home Depot or shoppers at a Home Depot and stuff falls on them from the top shelf. That's because a certain law wasn't followed. There is an even less sexy crime, because we think of like murder as very sexy. Regulation violation. There's all kinds of regulations. I mean, we've got the safety regulations that I mentioned, like, keeping the mine safe. We've got regulations on Wall Street to make sure our market is free. So trading stocks on inside information, this is what got Martha Stewart put behind bars, is against the law. Also, we have a lot of environmental regulations that we want to keep our world safe. We don't think it's a good idea to dump toxic waste into the Willamette River. People swim in that river. People fish in that river. So we don't dump toxic waste. It's against the law. But to dispose of that waste properly costs money. It's just cheaper to just dump it in the river, right? And if I do that, I'm committing a crime. And I am endangering other people who swim in the river. And when I see people swimming on the Willamette, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. People who eat the fish and get cancer, right? There are people who are going to die because I violated that regulation. It's not a dramatic law or dramatic crime, but we see real harm that's done by that. But it's not just corporations that do this. An individual. If you throw out half a can of paint in your garbage, that's against the law. That's toxic waste. You have to dispose of it properly. You have to take it to the toxic waste disposal area, northwest Portland, where the guy who's in the hazmat suits will figure out where to put the old paint. So anybody can do this. But where we see the greatest harm done is among white-collar criminals who are in positions of power. They are the ones who are higher ups in corporations. They are the ones that are the decision makers at places that have to deal with toxic waste or regulations at all. And they tend to be older white men. White men in their mid-40s are the typical demographic of white-collar criminals. Kind of guys that look like me for the most part when I was a little bit younger. And these are not the people that you think about when you think about criminals. But I'm going to tell you right now, and this is really important, is that white-collar crimes, of these 4 crimes, violent crimes, getting stabbed and having to go to the doctor to get sewn up, property crime, somebody stole your car, victimless crime, you got busted for shrooms, or white-collar crime, you're paying more at the gas pump because the gas companies got together and fixed the price of a gallon of gas. The white-collar crimes are the one that cost you more money. The amount of money that we pay every year for increased insurance premiums for people committing insurance fraud, for example, or increased taxes because some people are not paying their taxes. Have we seen Donald Trump's tax returns yet? No, we haven't. That these types of crimes actually take a bunch more money out of our lives. They take thousands and thousands of dollars, where property crime, takes occasionally a $20 bill because we got mugged on 6th and Cooch. So, but because these crimes are more high status, and because these crimes are easier to conceal, often done on a computer in an office building somewhere, the cops ain't going after him like they're going after the guy in the housing project that's got a little bit of weed or a little bit of coke in his back pocket. And surprise, surprise, prisons are filled with the guys that look like the guy from the project who had some drugs on him, and not the white-collar criminals who are grifting and bilking Americans out of billions of dollars every year. So those 4 typologies help us to talk about crime. It's going to be useful in our next video, the part 2. This is a 3-part video. Part 2, we're going to talk about why we have a stereotype of crime. Why when we say the usual suspects, or he looks like a criminal, what we're talking about. We're going to talk about a certain individual in a story from history, this guy Willie Horton, and we're going to talk about how that stereotype about criminals is reinforced. So stay tuned. More sociology coming your way.